welcome back to Cocktail Party Economic Conversations, which is looking at topics related to the book Cocktail Party Economics. And today we have as our special guest Aaron Gladstone, and we're looking at the chapter in the book, chapter 10, called The Name of the Game. And this is a play on game theory because industry can be structured in such a way that they can play predictable games with predictable outcomes. And as economists, we care about that because it can reduce what we call social welfare. And so we might have regulators who are trying to make sure that markets stay as competitive as possible to get us to what we would call the social optimum. So, welcome, Aaron. Really glad you could make it.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, hi Aaron. It's Rick Maranta. Yeah, I just want to start by asking you a bit about your current role, and then maybe you can take us from your path from the beginning, where you came from at you did your undergrad at Guelph, and then just the path that you took and some of the things that led you to do what you're doing now. So I noticed your title is Competition Law Officer at the Competition Bureau of Canada. Man, I could have used you today. I was talking to my cable company, and I just like so I went down to a lower plan, and then they took away some kind of a discount that I had before, and I didn't realize that they take away the discount once I went down to the base package. Anyways, so man, sick 'em, go sick 'em for me. I don't think that's what you do, but I think it's a great name. So I'm just wondering if does that make you a competitive person or like a not competitive person?
Um, well, when I was at Guelph, I was on the debate team, so I guess take that as you will. But yeah, so a bit of background on me, I guess.
Yeah.
As you said, I went to Guelph. I was in first year economics 9 years ago, taking Professor Adame's course. And then since then, I graduated Guelph with a BA in economics
Mhm.
and a minor in business administration and another minor in history. And then I went on to Queen's University where I did a master's in economics. And that's kind of where I got involved in antitrust, which is
Mm.
essentially competition. And at Guelph, I was kind of focused on health economics. And then when I went to my master's, I started to focus on antitrust. And then I did my graduate research in pharmaceutical antitrust. And then that
Nice
kind of,
combo.
yeah, exactly. And then that kind of led into, um, you know, my job at the Bureau and an interest in it. I actually didn't know that the Competition Bureau existed until my graduate work. So,
Mm.
hopefully the kids watching this will know about it a bit sooner.
Cool. Yeah,
Do you
it's
feel like a cop? That's what I want to know. Do you feel like a
I, I,
police?
I describe it as like I am the nerdiest kind of officer. Like it is a desk job 99% of the time. Sometimes there's a moment of excitement when you depose a high-ranking executive in a multi-billion-dollar company, or kick down a door and seize documents. But
Really?
but kick down a door I use metaphorically.
yeah.
But basically, um, we are, the roughly you can think of us as the prosecutor or the police officer, kind of regulating competition and making sure that everyone plays by the rules. Essentially, if you think of like a competitive game of hockey, we're the ref, just making sure that there's no offsides.
I've noticed that there's like a lot going on right now in antitrust, stuff going on. Are you really immersed in that kind of stuff to see what's happening?
Yeah, so it's actually an interesting time. Antitrust is starting to get a bit more sexy. It kind of comes in ebbs and flows of,
Mhm.
people are interested and they're not. So, recently there's been some, appearances before congressional committees by Facebook, Google, the big
Mhm.
firms on antitrust issues. Um, we've had recent cases. We just settled with Facebook. They were fined $9 million for deceptive marketing, basically using people's data in ways that they hadn't gained permission to.
Mm.
We've had cases against Ticketmaster for drip pricing where they were fined $4.5 million. We've I've personally worked on some kind of mergers that people would know about. I led the team for the Cineplex acquisition, being acquired by Cineworld. I contributed to the review of the Google Fitbit acquisition. It's interesting that like
Mm,
names that the public would know. You may have never heard of us, but
mm,
we've probably impacted your life in some way.
I was going to ask, like when people look to get mergers to have mergers, sometimes there's a yes and sometimes there's a no. How often is it a no? You're not allowed to merge.
That's a good question. Very rarely, actually.
Yeah.
The vast majority of mergers are either fine or even pro-competitive. So, for example, if there's two companies that sell ice cream and they're both sending out 10 trucks each every day to deliver the ice cream, then maybe if they merge, they could consolidate those trucks and only have to send out 10 trucks between the two of them, or 15 trucks between the two of them, which could actually lead to efficiencies and be beneficial for the market. It's very rare that a merger results in anti-competitive effects, which are essentially to tie it back to your course. Higher prices, lower quality of services, lower quantity of products, less choice, less innovation, and less kind of confidence in the market.
I don't know if you can comment on this, and if you can't, that's fine. But Verizon keeps trying to come into our market and, enter our cell space, and they are always resisted. Probably I think they use information, security of information is part of the issue. Um, so how often do people just keep coming back to, they get a no and then they keep coming back?
So it happens. So generally, if parties, first off, I should back up a bit and just say that all comments during this conversation are my own. Any errors or omissions, of which there will probably be many, are my own, and I own them. And my views do not necessarily reflect the bureau. But in terms of whether or not companies come back, usually we'll review the merger, and if we deem it to be potentially anti-competitive, we may block the merger. But we are not the judge, jury, and executioner. So if we believe that a merger is anti-competitive, then we have to apply to the competition tribunal, which is a quasi-judicial court. It's essentially a court for our purposes, where we can be thought of as kind of the prosecutor, and then the parties who want to merge are the defendants, and then we plead our cases. And if through that process the parties lose, or through that process the parties say, you know what, forget about it, we're going to walk away, then they may come back, within the next few years. Maybe there's a change in the market. For example, take a company like TeleDirect, who used to be dominant in the Yellow Pages telephone book industry. Well, things have changed in the last 20 years, and now you can easily Google it. So like those kind of developments in a market can seriously change whether a company is dominant, and therefore whether a merger is problematic.
Hmm.
do you take part in, like, say, break up of companies, say large companies, and is that at your initiative, the bureau's initiative, to say this is out of hand, or is it somebody else, and then you're sort of that arm that does that?
So it's a good question. Big is not, like we commonly say, big is not always bad.
Mhm.
So if a company, let's say that you invent some new product, and it's a revolutionary product, it's a drug that cures cancer or something like that, and you all of a sudden own this market and are a monopolist in this market because you've developed this drug that nobody else can match. In that case, more power to you. As long as you become a monopolist by fair competition and by fair means, then we're not looking to break up companies willy nilly, or we're not a price regulator, so we're not going to go in and say, hey, you're charging $10 for this product, you have to charge 8. You're not allowed to charge 10. That's not really our cup of tea. Um, but where a company does something that is against the rules, unfair, to achieve that monopoly, and we say kind of enhance, maintain, or create market power, then that is where we get involved to make sure that everyone's playing by the rules.
That must be so hard to really enforce because, companies often, if they're doing this to enhance their situation, it's not like they're doing it publicly. There's some sort of covert stuff going on. And like, for instance, the recent case with all of the grocery stores all at the same time reducing their wage from COVID, right? So they gave a COVID premium and then they all reduced it. And then it looked like they must have colluded to get rid of the wage premium. So then, of course, they're going to argue, no, we didn't collude. Like, how much of a leader follower model? Somebody does it, I copy you. Is that collusion or is that not collusion?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, and take a simple example. I always go back to two gas stations on a corner because it's the simplest case of competition, simple product. If I run a gas station and you run a gas station, if you drop your price to $1, I'm not going to charge $1.10. I'm going to follow you down to $1. Maybe I'll put it at 99 cents, right? So there is this kind of leader follower where I'm going to be reacting to my competitors. Or there can be obviously cartels and collusion behind the scenes. So in those kind of situations, we have a cartels directorate that prosecutes cartels. It's a criminal offense. And essentially, many of those cases are started through our immunity and leniency program, whereby if one person comes forward and says, hey, I'm involved in a cartel, or I know about a cartel or whatnot, that person can be granted immunity, and therefore they're not prosecuted and possibly sent to jail. So often it's a whistleblower or somebody on the inside. But then again, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is just somebody who sees prices moving in a certain kind of tandem motion, and they report it to us, and we have free reign to investigate. And we can acquire documents through civil subpoenas, or by, as I said, kind of kicking down the door and searching premises and seizing laptops and that kind of stuff.
That must be scary when that happens. Suddenly someone's in your office and they're taking everything. That must be terrifying.
I've never gotten to do it personally myself, but I've heard that it's 5 seconds of excitement and then days of boredom as you're like combing through the documents and
Yeah. What's the most common kind of anti-competitive behavior that you think, or as Canadians we should be most worried about?
So to give you a bit of background, there are 4 enforcement branches at the Bureau. There's monopolistic practices, which is kind of a unilateral exercise of market power. So that's one firm doing something unfair. Then there's mergers and acquisitions, which is 2 companies coming together or one being bought by the other. Then there's deceptive marketing practices, which is everything like
Rick's story.
Yeah. You want to jump in?
No, Rick's story about his cable.
Oh,
or whatever.
yeah. So it's basically saying like, are you advertising the true price? It's also dealing with scams. So we put out a little black book of scams, which maybe we can like link to it or something. But I think that everyone should be aware of it. Canadians lost over $100 million last year to scam artists. And that ranges from, the fake CRA calls that you get, to romance scams, to puppy scams, where somebody says, I have a puppy for sale, and then you send them a deposit, and then you never get the puppy. So there are some very vicious and egregious kinds of deceptive marketing that can really affect people.
There's even the totally useless business like duct cleaning that nobody actually needs duct cleaning.
Exactly.
But you really probably can't prosecute them because it's like, okay, if you want to pay for something that nobody actually really needs, right?
Yeah, so that's the thing. Like, if I call you and say, "Hi, can I clean your ducts for $100?"
Right.
That's probably fine. If I call you and say, "Hi, your ducts need to be cleaned, or else your house is going to catch fire," and kind of lie to you in order to coerce you into paying for that service, then that's where I'm crossing a line and eroding the trust of consumers in the market by lying to them. It also
Interesting.
covers basic things like packaging on goods. So how
Yeah.
do I know that the things in my can of soup are actually in my can of soup? When
Yeah.
I go grocery shopping or something
The
like that.
the energy companies were doing that quite a bit, people were coming to my door. This has happened to me, coming to your door with, like, vests on and saying, "I need to see your, like, your water heater or whatever. Can I see your bill?" As if they were, like, an official government or whatever, and I remember at one time I had these 2 who they came right to my house, these 2 women, and then they were laughing at me. They said, "Oh, you don't wanna save money?" But this was very deceptive in my mind, what they were doing, these, like, energy companies, as if they had a right to come and see my water heater or furnace or whatever, or my bill, even, "Can you show me your bill?" And it's like, wow.
Yeah, so it's very dangerous, and the most vulnerable in our society are the ones who are preyed on the most. Sorry for a bit of a tangent. This actually doesn't really have to do much with monopolies versus perfect competition, but that is kind of an area that's kind of close to my heart, and I really think is important to maintain confidence in the market.
And you said there's 4, so I think you've done 3.
Right, perfect. Sorry, so it was monopolistic practices, mergers and acquisitions, deceptive marketing practices, and cartels is the last one. So, for the purposes of this discussion, cartels and mergers and acquisitions are probably the most important.
Mhm.
And then we also have an advocacy branch and an international branch. So, I've personally worked with my counterparts around the world. Staying up till midnight to have a conversation with an Asian, representative and whatnot. It's really fun to kind of have this common purpose, but very different experiences around the world. And in the advocacy branch, we reach out to and assist other government agencies and other entities with their competition policies. So, for example, we've sent a submission to the city of Toronto regarding Uber. We sent a submission to the city of Ottawa regarding allowing more competition in their food truck industry. And we recently, just within the last few weeks, sent a letter to the Minister of Consumer Government and Consumer Services of Ontario regarding, as he mentioned previously, rental appliances and how there are some issues in that market.
Wow. So, in terms of competition, thinking about what students will be learning in an intro course, cartels, there's some legal cartels. So, things like, well, basically, the dairy farmers
Mm-hmm.
of it's basically a legal cartel. So, some cartels are illegal and some are legal, and some monopolies are legal, like the LCBO, and others are not so legal. So I guess in terms of the government, how do they kind of put things into, okay, we're really going to be caring about this kind of, anti-competitive behavior, but we're going to support it if it's in another sector. How do they kind of divide things up?
So it's a good question. And we personally don't write the laws or the regulations. So basically, a regulated monopoly, like, as you said, dairy farmers or hydro utilities. There's one monopoly, Toronto Hydro, Electra, Guelph Hydro, whatever, wherever you live, there's no competition in the distribution of electricity. It's a regulated monopoly. Or something like the Bank of Canada is a crown corporation. Nobody competes with the Bank of Canada. Or hospitals in Ontario, you can't set up your own hospital and compete. So there's these kind of regulated monopolies whereby whichever government entity it is has decided that the pros of having this monopoly outweigh the cons, and therefore they have put in legislation to allow these specific monopolies to exist, or these specific cartels. Or there's situations where it's kind of outside of our jurisdiction. So, for example, it's something like OPEC, which is I always butcher this, the oil producer something commission, or I can't remember it. Anyways,
We've been calling it OPEC since the 70s.
yeah. So OPEC is a bunch of countries who produce oil,
Yeah.
and they are essentially an international cartel. But because they're outside of our jurisdiction, we don't really touch that. Then you have milk quotas, as you mentioned. We have legal monopsonies, like unions, whereby we recognize the benefit of collective bargaining and allow certain kinds of monopsonies. And then we have, patents, trademarks, copyrights, etc., whereby we recognize that in order to spur innovation, we will grant a monopoly for this product that you have invented or whatnot for some limited period of time.
I guess my concern when I think a little bit about how markets are changing and moving kind of online, the online space, are you worried at all about monopolies like in kind of cyberspace?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting, and there's many who call for kind of the breakup of large digital players, Google, Facebook, etc., Amazon, and we really are seeing this explosion of a digital economy, um, where there's kind of multiple schools of thought. One of which being, we need to separate these entities because they're getting too powerful. But then there's another school of thought of when was the last time you were on MySpace, right? So there's kind of this churn whereby there may be competition for a market or there could be competition in a market. So competition in a market is two gas stations competing against each other, whereas competition for a market is these situations where we have these network effects that lead to big firms, but then they can be displaced by another big firm that has some novel idea that makes things so much better. Um,
Yeah, it's
so, yeah.
sorry. I was just gonna say, like, no, that's interesting. It's something I like when you think of Amazon being such a juggernaut, right, of for online sales, but then you look at something like Shopify, the Canadian company. I mean, they do well in their own space, but it's very similar
Mhm.
for online commerce. But you realize they're actually competition as well to some degree of Amazon, right? Not in exactly the same way, but those are kind of interesting things that you're saying. They're in the same, so there's competition that could push others out eventually, like MySpace got pushed out. Or yeah, it's interesting.
But one thing that we do have to watch is kind of predatory acquisitions, whereby, and many people feel that Facebook's acquisition of Instagram, for example, was a predatory acquisition whereby Facebook saw Instagram coming up and possibly challenging them, and so they bought it. So that's something that we have to be very wary of, and especially in the digital space because it moves so quickly, it can be very difficult at times to really understand, you know, should the Facebook Instagram merger have been approved? Or if it hadn't been approved, then would Instagram have grown into what it is today, or would it have failed, or would it have been something completely different? So it's very hard to kind of gaze into that crystal ball. We use a lot of econometrics and analysis and gather information from the market to do our best job. But with the digital economy, especially, it moves very quickly and it keeps us on our toes.
I know, but what a big issue is that these companies are, stationed outside of Canada.
Mhm.
So I know the US is talking about banning TikTok from the US. I just think that sometimes when you have international cyber moves borders really quickly. So a merger can be approved in another country, and what can we do about it? Like we can't stop a merger if it doesn't originate here.
So it's interesting. Any company that has a substantial amount of commerce in Canada or a physical presence in Canada, so if they have a Canadian subsidiary or if they sell into Canada from an American subsidiary, for example, we can challenge that merger or conduct, whatever it may be. But you're absolutely right that in this kind of globalized age, it's become a lot more important to work with our international counterparts and really, share information, coordinate, share ideas, and really create this global community that is looking at these, behemoth mergers of multi-billion dollars. For example, like something like Google Fitbit, like that merger affects any country where Fitbit is sold and Google operates, which is probably, I have no idea, probably over half the countries in the world.
Probably more. Not that everyone's getting a Fitbit, but probably they all have Google.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, actually, this conversation's been really interesting. And I have to comment, and I'm sure some people are going to notice this when they watch our little podcast, thinking, "Wow, he's really young." So you've done really well for being out of school. You did intro micro like 9 years ago, so you've done grad school in the meantime. But um, your career path has been pretty interesting, and you've gotten pretty far. So, do you think it's because you've moved into the government sector that was made it available for you?
Yeah. So I went straight from my master's at Queen's into this job. So I've been at the bureau for 4 years, um, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been a fantastic experience, um, and I would recommend it if anyone's interested.
It sounds so cool saying you're with the bureau. Like it sounds like you're
I
like
know
some
you're with the
FBI guy, CIA. That's
That's
cool.
right.
yeah.
But
I
yeah,
guess every time there's law enforcement, you need a bureau.
and we do, work with other law enforcement agencies, whether it's the RCMP or the Canadian Anti-Fraud
Mhm.
Center, or more local police forces to enforce fraud. So it's a lot of fun, but we are definitely not the guys, putting on the bulletproof vest and suiting up. We're the nerdy guy behind the
Your
desk.
you put the pocket protector in and your calculator
Exactly.
in the holster.
No, it's on his Fitbit. He's got it. He's got
Yeah.
his
Oh
calculator
yeah.
on his
That's right.
watch.
Right. Hey Google.
Hey, go. What's Yeah, that's right. So, well, anyway, thanks so much, Aaron. It's great.
Yeah.
I'm sure students will suddenly see the chapter on monopolies in a slightly different way because obviously, when textbooks are written, they use examples that the authors are more familiar with, and often the authors are like my age, and so you've had some opportunity to see things that probably younger people would be able to, see as significant, like Instagram and Facebook, because that has probably affected them more than, say, whether or not cab companies colluded on fares, especially now that Uber has entered into the market. So, anyway, thanks so much. And hopefully, we keep in touch. It's always good when Guelph alumni. I know you went to Queens, but you still were a Guelph person originally. So make sure you keep in touch with us and let us know what happens in your future.
Absolutely. Happy to do
Thanks
it.
so much, Aaron.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.